Okay, can everybody hear me? I'm trying to yell. I don't deal in numbers or arguments or evidence, and there will be no Q&A, so fear not. So the only numbers I will say are that these poems are regarding the illness of my husband, who died about a year and a half ago. He was 68, and he had Alzheimer's for about 12 years. So those are some numbers for you. Somebody yesterday spoke of intersections, how every human being is an intersection of different identities. And these poems could be looked at. They're from my latest book, The Golden Road, that came out late last year. They're poems written by somebody who had been writing poems for half a century. That's one way to look at them. Another way to look at them is as the testimony of a caregiver who was a poet before she became a caregiver, obviously. And that they do things that poems do. They are inconsistent in their use of pronouns. Sometimes I say you and sometimes I say he. They use a lot of figurative language, which is one way that I use to think. And I think it was Coleridge who talked about we think, well, not only Coleridge, but Coleridge was one of the first. If I am able to compare something as invisible as dementia to something that I can see, it is helpful. These are also poems that I wrote during those years to keep myself afloat, to figure out and record what I was thinking and feeling during the last 5 or so years of this illness. And finally, I also realized, having had interesting conversations with several people, Brian and others, that these were not intended to be at the time, but they proved to be answers to unanswerable questions that I asked myself and that other people asked you, like, when did he get sick? Or does he recognize you? There are no answers to these questions with this disease, so the poems sort of help. So there will be 8 poems, none of them horribly long. I'm standing on tiptoe now to see over the podium. The onset. When did your illness start? I and our son reckon it must have happened in between the time you held him throned on your shoulders high above the world and when the towers fell. Between the time you reasoned with him in the talking chair and his freshman year. Between the time you and I used to swing him as he walked, 1, 2, 3, whoosh, he held a hand of each, and when he started sleeping with his girlfriend. Such lavish spans, dwarfing mere puberty, leave years to play with. I could narrow them, approximate with more precision when the shadow started ever so slowly creeping over you. But clarity is not available as in remembered endings. The last time we talked or laughed. The last time we looked each other in the eye and saw a future. And this is about the same topic, which I certainly kept returning to, the invisibility of the beginning. But here I'm on a train going north in Vermont, on the wonderful Vermonter train as the sun is going down. It's called Between Brattleboro and Bellows Falls. Darkness rose as day behind the trees dwindled, although the occasional metal roof, mimicking a river or a lake, might briefly lob back light until the train sped on and the specious glow was lost. We move past trees and then an open field, then trees again, and day, when we emerge, is that much closer to ending. Light has gone down a notch. Change works like that. The pace of decline seems vanishingly slow, but look up. The sky's darker. Gazing blankly into the twilit window, I snare a fragment of conversation, floating back from when we still had conversations, or I thought we did. But the next day, it was for you as if that conversation had never happened. I looked up and saw the sky had changed. This is a test many of you in this room will be familiar with called the Boston Naming Test, administered by wonderful Dr. James Noble, who doesn't seem very sympathetic in the poem, but that's just me, because I use a mean verb. I say he abandons us, but that Dr. Noble was never anything but wonderful. This is a test given to measure aphasia, as I understand it. Pages of images, a child's blunt scissors, escalator, pretzel, tennis racket, igloo, camel, wreath. Scooped out of syntax, each object still the entrance to a world of story and association. But this is not a game. These words are clad in the uniform of their profession. They are employed by the Boston Naming Test, apparently so called because they prove almost impossible for you to name, as, neither for the first time nor the last, I sit beside you, helpfully not helping. You stand up, push your chair back from the table, and walk away before you've finished failing. It's been a long morning, says the doctor, shuffling the pages with their orphaned icons into a folder. He abandons us together in a silence one might liken to a sheet of paper, either blank or scribbled over with an alphabet nobody can read, or else to a calm sea closing over your head. This is called Neurology Floor. It's actually the 8th floor of Milstein Pavilion, which I came to know very well, with its wonderful river views. And for some reason, we're now in the third person. I'm not sure why. The same sea, says Elizabeth Bishop, over and over, the same, the same. I disagree, says Heraclitus. You can't step into it again. He means the river. Both are right and both are wrong. I do remember the Hudson, broad, unwrinkled blue in the cold sunlight of December. If you have changed, then what of me, river? I'm aging unlike you. You were here first, you'll be here last. You go with, no, you are the flow. You pour yourself into the sea. The harbor mouth is out of sight from this 8th floor window's view as afternoon turns into night. Bridge, park, river, sky, and sea, always changing, seem the same, allowing for the season's shifts as we wade deeper into time. I and my husband close together stand at the window, watch the river. A gull wheels toward the Palisades. Sunset is ambered in forever. The question, and one of the questions always was, does he recognize you? Or how do you know if he recognizes you? One way I know he knows who I am, he roams around after I've left the room looking for me. Or that is what they say. I really only know what I can see. Sometimes he smiles at me. He nods when I ask, do you remember? He opens his mouth as if to speak. I hand him grapes. He takes them delicately between finger and thumb. The question isn't whether he recognizes me, but whether I recognize him. There isn't any answer. Sometimes we sit by the river and watch the seasons. Spring turns into summer. Fall turns into winter. And you can see these poems overlap a lot. This is called Carl Schwartz Park because for a couple of years my husband was in a fairly fancy facility near Gracie Mansion and Carl Schwartz Park, and I prefer Riverside Park, but I got used to Carl Schwartz Park. The crosstown bus, river to river, takes me from one world to the other. Fall in the park, a Halloween costume for dogs. In spring, a moving frieze of bicyclists, skateboarders, dog walkers, lovers, many parents pushing strollers. Sometimes, oftener now, a few passers-by steal a glance at you, tall, slack-jawed, holding my hand, striding swiftly. We reach the river. Look, a boat. I'd like to linger. You've turned away already, pacing restlessly from now to then. We pause to buy a popsicle from childhood's good humor man. 2-poem warning. That's what they call it in the business.
Go on forever.
Oh, that's so sweet. There's a small review of this book in the Times Book Review tomorrow, to toot my own horn. It's called Autumnal. I can't imagine why. This is a little tiny bit more background. I was actually in the country and trying to get a little R&R, and there was yet another crisis in the city. And this is a poem about the limits of attention. It could be said to be about the deficits of attention and their possible benefits. Only so much. I bend to the open notebook, distracted, turn my head. Tiny brown ants are climbing up a stalk of goldenrod. It isn't clear what goal they hope to reach. I pick up a sharpened pencil, start to sketch. A passing cloud, the sky goes dull. I shut the notebook and open it from the back to write. There is only so much we can notice all at once. Now this morning's dream makes an appearance. Packed lecture hall where students overflow to aisles and floor. What do they want to know? I have a sense they're gathered here to learn some kind of surgery. The brain donation card, wallet size, arrived in this morning's mail. I close the notebook. The patient ants still crawl. A sudden breeze, the grasses toss their tops. Wild strawberry runners are clambering over this rock where, if I sat here long enough, eventually the tough, lithe tendrils would also crisscross me. I could climb down from my temporary tower, go to the house and fill a glass with water, get out my watercolors, dip my brush, memorialize this moment with a wash of color, sketch the runners, trace a border, as if imitation equaled order. Or I could take a walk down to the brook, or stretch out in the hammock with a book, or let my thoughts-read runners trace a line to the null magnet of my husband's brain, the hospital where he's undergoing observation, the arid, wide plateau of the condition, a battleground to which I will return, but there is room for only so much attention. And the last one sort of hopscotches across a couple of decades, and it ends up with back in Milstein or the ER, but it begins way back during the AIDS epidemic, where I worked with a number of poets at GMHC. And it's what Andrew Del Banco of the English department here at Columbia calls applied literature. It's called the book in the bag, but it could be the Kindle in the pocket or whatever. I'm a little low-tech. It's about having something to read, even if you can't actually put your hand on it at the moment, and maybe something to read to somebody. The book in the bag. May 92, Waverly Place. My friend Charlie lay in bed. I looked at his beautiful blind face and took a book from my bag and read Emma. Austen sets the scene in chapter 1. He smiled. I see. Highbury opens like a fan. I leaned over. We kissed goodbye. Fast forward, slush replaces green. 10 years have passed, or maybe more. Tethered to a slow machine, I'm giving platelets at Citicorps, leafing with the hand that's free through Keats's letters. Trouble and pain school the soul, do you not see? Then out into the world again. 2009, it's Christmas time. I am 17 years older than that spring evening. What new tome is tucked in the bag slung over my shoulder? Orlando Furioso, full of maidens, knights, a magic steed. My husband, captive in his cell of silence, can no longer read. In the ER, we share a chair, no room to extricate the book. The hippogriff zooms from the sorcerer's lair. I do not even need to look. I unbutton his coat. No need for speech. The weapons that I need to fight this battle are within my reach. I settle in for a long night. Thank you.